The sky above the alien planet Zora shimmered with a dance of colors, an ethereal spectacle that signaled the onset of the festival season. It was a time of joy and celebration, where families gathered to revel in the harmonious union of nature and civilization. For 9-year-old Xena, it was a day like any other, filled with the warmth of her parents' love and the anticipation of the festivities. Her mother, a gentle soul with a voice like a lullaby, and her father, a brave pilot who soared among the stars, were the pillars of her world. But fate, with its cruel and unpredictable hand, had other plans. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of violet and gold, a sudden disturbance shattered the peace. The air was thick with the hum of engines, an unusual sound that drew the attention of the townsfolk. Xena, curious and ever adventurous, rushed to the open field with her parents, their faces mirroring concern. In the distance, a spaceship appeared, its once sleek and majestic form now marred with damage. Flames licked the vessel's sides and smoke trailed behind it like a mourning veil. It was her father's ship, the one that had always brought him home safely. Xena's heart pounded in her chest, a cold dread seeping into her bones as she clutched her mother's hand. The ship, struggling to stay aloft, descended with a terrifying speed. Panic spread through the crowd, but for Xena, the world slowed, every second stretching into an eternity. With a deafening roar, the ship crashed into the field, skidding to a halt amidst a cloud of dust and debris. The ground trembled, and the impact sent a shockwave through the area. Xena's mother shielded her with her body, the force of the blast knocking them to the ground. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and the cries of those who had witnessed the disaster. Xena struggled to her feet, her eyes wide with horror. Her mother lay beside her, motionless, her once vibrant eyes now dull. A scream tore from Xena's throat, a primal sound of anguish that echoed through the chaos. She stumbled forward, desperate to reach her father's ship, her tiny feet carrying her across the scorched earth. Amidst the wreckage, survivors crawled out, their faces etched with pain and fear. Xena's eyes frantically searched for her father. Her heart sank as she saw him, bloodied and bruised, emerging from the mangled cockpit. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. As her father took a step towards her, a piece of the ship's structure, weakened by the flames, collapsed. In an instant, he was gone, buried beneath the twisted metal. Xena's knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. The world around her faded, the vibrant colors of the festival replaced by the gray haze of despair. She was alone, her parents taken from her in a blink of an eye. The pain was unbearable, a searing ache that consumed her entire being. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity. Rescue teams arrived, pulling survivors from the wreckage and tending to the injured. A gentle hand touched Xena's shoulder, but she barely registered it. She was lost in her grief, her young mind unable to comprehend the enormity of her loss. A medic lifted her into his arms, cradling her like a fragile doll. As they carried her away from the site, Xena's eyes remained fixed on the wreckage, the last place she had seen her parents. She felt numb, the shock of the tragedy encasing her in a cocoon of disbelief. The medic's soothing words were lost on her, drowned out by the echo of her own sobs. Xena was taken to a nearby medical facility, where her injuries were treated. The doctors spoke in hushed tones, their sympathetic glances making it clear that they knew the weight of her loss. She was alone now, an orphan in a world that had suddenly grown cold and unkind. The days that followed were a blur of formalities and sympathetic faces. Her parents' funeral was a somber affair, attended by friends and family who offered their condolences, but none of them could ease the pain in Xena's heart. She stood by their graves, a tiny figure against the backdrop of the vast, uncaring universe. When the ceremonies were over, and the last of the mourners had left, Xena found herself at the mercy of her relatives. But they, too, were unable or unwilling to care for her. Their polite but distant demeanor made it clear that she was a burden. With no other options, Xena was sent to an orphanage, a place where unwanted children were left to fend for themselves. The orphanage was a stark, sterile building devoid of warmth or compassion. The other children were strangers, their faces marked by the same hollow look of loss. Xena felt a crushing loneliness settle over her. The world she had known, filled with love and security, had crumbled, leaving her adrift in an ocean of uncertainty. On her second day at the orphanage, Xena decided she couldn't stay. The cold walls and the indifferent staff were a constant reminder of her new reality. In the dead of night, she slipped out of her room, her footsteps silent on the cold, hard floor. With a determination that belied her age, she made her way to the exit. The door creaked open, and she stepped into the night, the cool air biting at her skin. Xena walked through the empty streets, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. She had no plan, no destination. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in the orphanage, where the pain of her loss seemed to grow with each passing day. The city was a labyrinth of towering buildings and unfamiliar faces. As she wandered, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She was alone, with no one to care for her, no place to call home. But in that moment of despair, a spark of resilience ignited within her. Xena knew she had to survive, no matter what. She was her parents' daughter, and she would honor their memory by finding her own way in the world. With a heavy heart and a fierce determination, she pressed on, into the unknown. The city buzzed with life, its streets teeming with beings from every corner of the galaxy. Towering skyscrapers cast long shadows, and neon lights flickered in a dizzying array of colors. Yet, amidst the hustle and bustle, Xena felt a profound sense of isolation. Her small frame shivered under a thin, tattered cloak, her once vibrant eyes now dull with grief. She wandered aimlessly, her stomach gnawing with hunger, her heart heavy with loss. Xena had never imagined her life would come to this. Just days ago, she had been a carefree child, basking in the love of her parents. The memory of their faces, warm and kind, haunted her, contrasting starkly with the cold reality she now faced. The orphanage had been a nightmare, a place where children were herded like cattle, their cries echoing in the sterile corridors. Xena had fled, preferring the uncertain dangers of the streets over the cold indifference of the orphanage staff. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the city's lights flared to life, casting eerie shadows on the pavement. Xena found a quiet alleyway and curled up, hoping for a moment of respite. Her eyes fluttered shut, but the gnawing hunger kept her awake. Just as she was about to doze off, a shadow loomed over her. Startled, she looked up to see a man standing before her. He was tall, with a lean, wiry frame, dressed in a sleek, dark suit. His eyes were sharp, assessing her with a predatory gleam. "Lost, little one?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. Xena recoiled instinctively, clutching her cloak tighter around her. The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "No need to be afraid. I'm here to help." Xena hesitated, her mind racing. She had been warned about strangers, but the man's offer of help was tempting. She was tired, hungry, and utterly alone. The man seemed to sense her hesitation and knelt down to her level, his gaze softening. "You don't have to live like this," he continued. "I can offer you food, shelter, a warm bed. All I ask is that you follow a few simple rules." The promise of warmth and a full belly was too much to resist. Xena's defenses crumbled, and she nodded slowly. The man's smile widened, and he extended a hand. "Come with me, then. We'll take care of you." He led her through the winding streets, away from the crowded city center and into a quieter, more secluded area. The buildings here were old and worn, their facades cracked and faded. They arrived at a large, nondescript building, its entrance flanked by two imposing guards. The man exchanged a brief nod with them, and they stepped aside, allowing Xena and her new guardian to enter. Inside, the building was surprisingly well kept. The air was warm, and the scent of food wafted through the halls. Xena's stomach growled, and the man chuckled. "We'll get you something to eat soon," he assured her. He led her down a corridor and into a spacious room filled with children of various ages. They were dressed in clean clothes and sat at long tables, eating in silence. Some looked up as Xena entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness. "This is where you'll stay," the man explained, guiding her to an empty seat. "You'll have food, clothes, and a place to sleep. But in return, you'll need to help us with a few tasks." Xena glanced around, noting the guarded expressions of the other children. A sense of unease settled over her, but the pangs of hunger drowned out her doubts. She picked up a plate and began to eat, the food tasting like ash in her mouth. The man watched her with a satisfied expression, then turned and left the room. As the days passed, Xena settled into a routine. The other children were friendly but guarded, their conversations laced with caution. She learned that they all had similar stories: lost, abandoned, orphans left to fend for themselves. The man who had brought her here was known as Mr. Gray, a shadowy figure who rarely showed his face. Instead, he sent his subordinates to instruct the children in their tasks. It wasn't long before Xena discovered what those tasks entailed. One morning, she was summoned to Mr. Gray's office. He sat behind a large mahogany desk, his fingers steepled as he regarded her. "You've been doing well," he began, his tone conversational. "But now it's time for you to contribute." He gestured to a small object on the desk, a sleek, black device. "This is a cloaking chip," he explained. "It will make you invisible to security systems. Your job is simple: go out into the city and collect some donations." Xena's heart sank. She had heard the whispers among the other children, the hushed tales of theft and deception. Her parents had always taught her that stealing was wrong, that honesty was the best path. But now, faced with the alternative of being thrown back onto the streets, she felt trapped. "Mr. Gray seemed to sense her hesitation. He leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "If you want to stay here, you have to do it," he said, his voice cold. "Otherwise, you're free to leave. But remember, out there, no one cares about you. Here, you're safe, provided you follow the rules." Tears welled up in Xena's eyes, but she blinked them away. She knew she had no choice. With a trembling hand, she reached for the cloaking chip and nodded. "I'll do it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mr. Gray smiled, a look of satisfaction crossing his face. "Good," he said, sitting back in his chair. "Welcome to the family." That night, Xena ventured into the city under the cover of darkness. The cloaking chip hummed softly in her pocket, a constant reminder of her task. She moved through the crowded streets, her heart pounding in her chest. But she spotted a well-dressed man standing near a shop, his wallet peeking out of his coat pocket. Taking a deep breath, Xena approached him, her movements swift and deliberate. She brushed against him lightly, her fingers deftly slipping into his pocket and retrieving the wallet. The man glanced at her briefly, but then turned away, oblivious to the theft. Xena quickly ducked into an alley, her heart racing with adrenaline. She had done it. As she walked back to the facility, a mix of guilt and relief washed over her. She knew what she had done was wrong, but she also knew that it was the only way to survive. She couldn't go back to the orphanage or the streets. This was her life now, and she had to accept it. Back at the facility, Mr. Gray greeted her with a rare smile. "Well done," he praised, patting her on the back. "You've made your first contribution. Remember, the more you bring in, the better your life will be here." Xena nodded silently, her emotions swirling within her. She had become part of something much bigger than herself, something she couldn't fully comprehend. But for now, she had a place to stay, food to eat, and clothes to wear. She pushed her guilt and doubts aside, vowing to survive in this new world no matter the cost. And so Xena's life with the gang began. She learned the art of deception, mastering the skills of stealth and thievery. Each day, she grew more adept at her tasks, her conscience slowly numbing to the moral implications. The once innocent girl, who had lost everything in a tragic crash, was now a skilled thief, navigating the shadows of the city's underbelly. But deep down, buried beneath layers of fear and survival instincts, a small part of her still longed for the warmth and love she had once known. A part of her that still believed in the goodness of the world, despite everything she had experienced. A part of her that, one day, might find a way out of the darkness. As the years passed, Xena honed her skills and rose through the ranks. Her missions became more complex and dangerous, each success earning her more trust from Gregor and the gang. But with each step deeper into the criminal underworld, Xena felt a growing emptiness inside her. She longed for something more, something beyond the cold, calculated world she had been thrust into. In the darkened corners of her mind, a plan began to form, a plan to escape, to find a new life, and to reclaim the freedom she had lost. But for now, she had to bide her time, play her part, and wait for the right moment to break free from the chains that bound her. And so, Xena continued to walk the fine line between survival and morality, her heart torn between LD have to choose, and that choice would change her life forever. Weeks before, Xena had been summoned to the gang's hideout, a dilapidated building that served as their headquarters. The leader, a stern man known only as Drax, had been waiting for her in a dimly lit room. His face was shadowed, the only illumination coming from a single flickering bulb hanging above. The air was thick with tension, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Drax had eyed her with a piercing gaze, as if weighing her worth. "We have a job for you," Xena he had said, his voice low and commanding. A big one. Xena had stood before him, her heart thudding in her chest. She had done countless jobs for the gang, each one more challenging than the last. But something about Drax's tone told her this mission would be different. He had slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of a grand mansion, opulent and imposing. "This is your target," he had explained, his eyes never leaving hers. "Roger Williams' estate. He's hosting a ball soon and you'll be attending." The photograph of Roger accompanied the image of the mansion, a man she knew only by name and reputation. He was wealthy, influential, and notoriously private. The perfect mark for a high-stakes theft. Xena had swallowed hard, the weight of the assignment settling over her. It was a dangerous mission, one that required finesse and deception, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to prove herself to the gang, to secure her place among them. Xena came to Earth, its wealth and decadence. In the midst of this glittering metropolis stood the opulent mansion of Roger Williams, a young tycoon known for his charisma and fortune. Tonight the mansion was ablaze with light and laughter, hosting one of the most anticipated events of the year, the Grand Winter Ball. It was a night where the city's elite gathered in their finest attire, flaunting their wealth and power. But beneath the surface of this glamorous facade, an intricate web of deception was being spun. In a hidden corner of the city, far from the dazzling lights, Xena stood before a cracked mirror in a dimly lit room. The reflection staring back at her was almost unrecognizable. Gone was the street-hardened thief with a sharp gaze and guarded expression. In her place stood a vision of elegance and allure, a woman cloaked in mystery and grace. Xena's long, silver-blue hair cascaded down her back, framing her delicate features. Her deep violet eyes, accentuated by smoky makeup, gleamed with a dangerous mix of determination and doubt. The dress she wore was a masterpiece, a figure-hugging gown of midnight blue, adorned with shimmering crystals that caught the light with every movement. The neckline plunged daringly, revealing just enough to tantalize without being overt. Around her neck hung a necklace of sapphires, borrowed from the gang's collection of stolen treasures. Each piece of jewelry she wore was a reminder of the life she led, a life she had to leave behind if she succeeded tonight. Xena took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. The mission was clear: infiltrate the mansion, locate Roger Williams' private safe, and retrieve a data chip containing information valuable to the gang's leader. Failure was not an option, and yet a small part of her hesitated, torn between her duty and an inexplicable yearning for something more. As she arrived at the mansion, Xena was struck by its grandeur. The marble facade gleamed under the lights, and a red carpet stretched out before the grand entrance. Valets and security guards stood at attention, ushering in guests who arrived in luxury vehicles. Xena stepped out of the car provided for her and glided up the steps, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and anticipation. She presented her invitation, a forgery, of course, and entered the grand hall. The ballroom was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. A live orchestra played a waltz, filling the room with a melody that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the night. Xena's eyes darted around, taking in the lavish surroundings. She noted the exits, the locations of the security personnel, and the layout of the room. Her training kicked in and she mentally mapped out the quickest route to her target. As she moved through the crowd, Xena felt eyes on her. She was an anomaly in this world of privilege and unknown beauty, with an air of mystery that drew attention. Whispers followed her like a shadow, and she caught snippets of conversations as she passed. It was then that she saw him, Roger Williams, standing near the center of the room, surrounded by admirers. He was everything the rumors had said and more. Tall and impeccably dressed, with a chiseled jaw and piercing blue eyes, he exuded an effortless charm that made people gravitate towards him. But what struck Xena most was the kindness in his eyes, a softness that seemed out of place in this world of cutthroat ambition. Their eyes met across the room, and in that instant, something shifted. Xena felt a jolt of electricity, a magnetic pull she couldn't explain. Roger's gaze lingered on her, a curious smile playing on his lips. He excused himself from his group and made his way toward her. Xena's heart raced. This wasn't part of the plan. She was supposed to blend in, remain unnoticed until she could make her move. But now, Roger Williams, her target, was walking straight toward her. "Good evening," Roger greeted her, his voice smooth and warm. I don't believe we've met. I'm Roger William. Xena smiled, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Xena, she replied, extending her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. William. The pleasure is mine, Xena, he said, taking her hand and pressing a light kiss to her knuckles. And please call me Roger. There was a moment of silence, a charged pause where the rest of the room seemed to fade away. Roger's eyes locked onto hers, and Xena felt an unsettling mix of emotions, nervousness, excitement, and a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Would you care to dance? Roger asked, extending his hand. Xena hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. She placed her hand in his, and he led her to the dance floor. As they moved to the music, Xena couldn't help but feel the weight of his gaze. There was something disarming about Roger, a sincerity that made her want to trust him. But she couldn't afford to let her guard down, not now. As they danced, Roger made small talk, asking about her background and interests. Xena answered carefully, weaving a story that blended truth with fiction. She had to be convincing; any slip-up could jeopardize the entire mission. But as the dance continued, Xena found herself genuinely enjoying his company. Roger was intelligent and witty, with a self-deprecating humor that made her laugh. For a moment she allowed herself to forget her purpose, to get lost in the music and the warmth of his touch. When the dance ended, Roger led her off the floor, still holding her hand. You have an air of mystery about you, he said, his tone teasing. It's intriguing. I don't suppose you'd care to stay a while longer, would you? Xena's mind raced. This was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Staying at the mansion would give her the perfect cover to execute the theft. Yet, as she looked into Roger's eyes, she felt a pang of guilt. He had been nothing but kind to her, and here she was, planning to betray him. But there was no turning back now. I'd like that, she replied, offering him a smile that she hoped masked the turmoil within her. Roger beamed, clearly pleased. Excellent. I'll have a room prepared for you. Feel free to explore the mansion. It's a beautiful place with a lot of history. Xena nodded, silently cursing the small part of her that wanted to forget the mission and just be with him. But she couldn't afford to be swayed by emotions. She had a job to do, and she intended to do it well. As the night wore on, Xena mingled with the other guests, keeping up appearances while discreetly gathering information about the mansion's layout and security systems. She learned that Roger's private quarters were on the 3rd floor, and that was where she would find the safe. She would have to be careful; the security was tight, and any mistake could be fatal. By the time the ball ended, Xena had a plan. She would wait until the mansion was quiet, then make her way to the 3rd floor and retrieve the data chip. It was a risky move, but it was her only option. She couldn't afford to fail. As she retired to her room for the night, Xena stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. She felt a heaviness in her chest, a sense of impending doom. She had been living a lie for so long, she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be herself. But tonight with Roger, she had glimpsed a life she could never have. A life of love, honesty, and freedom. It was a fleeting fantasy, and she knew it. Xena turned away from the window, steeling herself for the task ahead. She had come too far to let emotions cloud her judgment. She would complete the mission, deliver the data chip to the gang, and walk away from Roger Williams' world forever. It was the only way. With a heavy heart and a resolute mind, Xena prepared herself for the night's mission, knowing that the path she had chosen was a dangerous one. But it was her path, and she would walk it to the end. That prom night, Xena and Roger was intrigued by each other. In the following days they got used to each other and became even closer. Xena had come here to steal valuable things, but she didn't even think about it anymore. One day Xena sat by the window, her fingers lightly tracing the intricate patterns of the lace curtains. The soft glow of the setting sun bathed the room in a warm, golden hue, casting delicate shadows across the floor. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, a mirror image of the turmoil swirling within. She wore an elegant dress, a deep sapphire blue that accentuated her alien features, her porcelain skin, her deep-set eyes that gleamed with a hint of otherworldly iridescence. She had always been a thief, but now she felt like a thief of something far more precious than jewels or wallets. She was stealing time with Roger, time to feel something real. As the last rays of daylight faded, a soft knock echoed through the room. Xena's heart quickened, and she turned to see Roger standing in the doorway. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his dark hair slightly tousled, giving him an air of casual elegance. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, locked onto hers, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. "May I join you?" Roger's voice was gentle, yet it carried an undercurrent of curiosity and concern. Xena nodded, offering a faint smile. "Of course." He crossed the room and took a seat opposite her, his gaze never leaving her face. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the only sound the distant hum of the mansion's staff preparing for the evening ahead. Xena felt a pang of guilt. She knew she was supposed to be planning her theft, yet here she was, savoring the quiet moments with the man she was meant to deceive. "You seem lost in thought," Roger observed, his tone laced with genuine interest. "Is something troubling you?" Xena hesitated, her mind racing. She had always been a master of deception, her life a series of carefully crafted lies. But with Roger, she found it increasingly difficult to maintain the facade. His kindness, his generosity, and the way he looked at her like she was more than just a beautiful stranger were slowly unraveling the walls she had built around herself. Taking a deep breath, Xena decided to take a leap of faith. She met Roger's gaze, her eyes softening. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something about why I'm here." Roger leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You can tell me anything, Xena." Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of her secret pressing down on her. "I didn't come to the ball by chance," she confessed. "I was sent here to steal from you." For a moment there was silence. Roger's face remained calm, but his eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise and confusion. Xena felt a knot tighten in her stomach, fearing his reaction. She had expected anger, perhaps even disgust, but instead, Roger simply sat back, his gaze unwavering. "Go on," he encouraged softly. Xena's eyes welled with tears, her voice trembling as she continued. "I was taken in by a gang when I was a child. They gave me food, shelter, everything I needed. In return, I became their thief. They sent me here to steal from you, to rob your mansion during the ball." She paused, wiping away a stray tear. "But then I met you, and everything changed." Roger reached out, gently taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, reassuring. "How did it change?" he asked, his voice tender. Xena looked down at their joined hands, drawing strength from the contact. "I started to feel something I've never felt before. You showed me kindness, treated me with respect. You made me feel human." She glanced up, meeting his gaze with a mixture of hope and fear. "I didn't want to steal from you anymore. I didn't want to hurt you." A small, sad smile tugged at Roger's lips. "You must have been through so much," he murmured, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "I'm sorry you've had to live that way." Xena's eyes widened in surprise. "You're not angry?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Roger shook his head, his expression filled with empathy. "No, Xena, I'm not angry. I'm just glad you trusted me enough to tell me the truth." He paused, searching her eyes. "I can't imagine what it's been like for you, but I want you to know that you don't have to steal or lie anymore. You can be yourself here, with me." The sincerity in his words overwhelmed Xena. She felt a surge of emotions, relief, gratitude, and a warmth that spread through her chest. It was as if a weight had been lifted, the burden of her secret finally released. She had never felt so exposed, yet so safe. Roger leaned closer, his eyes searching hers. "Xena," he began, his voice soft and steady, "I don't care about the past. I only care about who you are now and who you want to be. If you want to stay, you can. And if you want to leave, I'll help you. But whatever you choose, know that I care about you." Tears spilled down Xena's cheeks, her heart swelling with a joy she had never known. She realized then that she had fallen in love with Roger, not because of his wealth or his status, but because of the kindness and understanding he had shown her. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen and accepted. Without thinking, Xena leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, tender kiss that spoke of all the emotions she couldn't put into words. Roger responded, his hand gently cupping her cheek, deepening the kiss. In that moment, all the fear, the guilt, and the uncertainty melted away, leaving only the warmth of their shared affection. When they finally pulled away, both were breathless, their eyes locked in a gaze filled with unspoken promises. Xena felt a sense of peace she had never experienced before. She knew that whatever the future held, she would face it with Roger by her side. "I want to stay," Xena whispered, her voice filled with conviction. "I want to be with you." Roger smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes. "Then stay," he said softly. "Stay with me." As the night descended, Xena and Roger sat together, hand in hand, their hearts beating as one. In the quiet embrace of the mansion, they found solace in each other's presence, knowing that their love had the power to overcome any obstacle. For Xena, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The air was thick with tension as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the opulent mansion. Xena stood by the grand windows, her gaze fixed on the vast gardens below, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the moment was near. The gang, the only family she had known for years, was coming. They would not understand her change of heart, nor would they forgive it. As she clutched the cool stone of the windowsill, memories of her past life as a skilled thief flooded her mind, memories she now wished to escape. Roger entered the room, his presence a comforting warmth against the growing chill in the air. He had sensed her unease and, without a word, wrapped his arms around her from behind. His touch was gentle, a silent promise of protection. "We'll be ready for them," he whispered into her ear, his breath warm against her skin. Xena leaned into him, drawing strength from his calm confidence. She had warned him about the gang's potential attack, and Roger had acted swiftly, bolstering the mansion's defenses and alerting the authorities. Still, the uncertainty of what was to come gnawed at her. As darkness fully enveloped the estate, the mansion's security team took their positions. Armed guards patrolled the grounds, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. Inside, the guests from the ball had long departed, leaving the grand halls eerily silent. The only sound was the faint hum of electricity and the distant chirping of crickets, a stark contrast to the storm brewing on the horizon. Xena and Roger made their way to the main hall, where the staff had discreetly locked the heavy double doors. The hall, with its high ceilings and ornate chandeliers, now felt like a fortress. Xena couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom as she looked around, her eyes lingering on the fine tapestries and the polished marble floor symbols of a life she had never known, but now found herself a part of. Suddenly the calm was shattered by the sharp crackle of static from Roger's earpiece. A voice crackled through, tense and urgent. Here Xena's breath caught in her throat. She knew the gang's tactics well. They were swift, ruthless, and unforgiving. She could almost picture them in her mind's eye, masked figures moving silently through the night, their eyes gleaming with the anticipation of a heist. Roger squeezed her hand, pulling her from her thoughts. "Stay close to me," he instructed, his voice steady. Xena nodded, her eyes meeting his. In that moment she saw the unwavering determination in his gaze, a determination to protect her at all costs. It was a look she had never seen in the eyes of the gang leaders, a look that made her believe in a future beyond the shadows of her past. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they waited. Then, without warning, the silence was broken by the sound of breaking glass. The gang had made their move. The guards sprang into action, rushing towards the source of the noise. Xena's heart raced as she heard the distant shouts and the muffled thud of footsteps. The main hall remained sealed, but it was only a matter of time before the gang reached them. Roger pulled her behind a column, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. The tension was palpable, each second ticking by with agonizing slowness. Then, the doors burst open with a force that sent a shockwave through the room. The gang leader, a tall, imposing figure dressed in black, stormed in, flanked by his loyal followers, his eyes, cold and merciless, locked onto Xena. "There she is," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. The little traitor Xena felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She knew this man well. He had been the one to take her under his wing, to teach her the ways of the street. Now, he stood before her as an enemy. The leader raised his gun, aiming it directly at her. "You thought you could betray us and get away with it," he snarled, his finger hovering over the trigger. Before Xena could react, Roger stepped in front of her, shielding her with his body. The leader's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. "Get out of the way, rich boy," he spat. "This is between me and her." But Roger stood his ground, his jaw set in a determined line. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me," he replied, his voice unwavering. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the promise of violence. Then, just as the leader's finger began to tighten on the trigger, the sound of sirens pierced the night. The police had arrived. The gang members exchanged nervous glances, their bravado faltering. The leader's eyes darted to the door, then back to Xena. "This isn't over," he growled, lowering his gun. In a flurry of motion, heavily armed police officers stormed the hall, their weapons drawn. The gang members scrambled to flee, but the police quickly subdued them, their escape routes cut off. Xena watched in stunned silence as the officers handcuffed the gang members, including the leader. His face was a mask of fury as he was led away, his eyes burning with hatred. As the last of the gang was escorted out, Xena felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was over. The nightmare that had haunted her for years had finally come to an end. She turned to Roger, her eyes filled with gratitude. He smiled at her, his expression softening. "You're safe now," he murmured, pulling her into a tight embrace. Xena buried her face in his chest, her tears finally spilling over. In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of the chaos, Xena felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time in years, she was free from the gang, free from the king, free from the fear, and free to start a new life. She looked up at Roger, her heart swelling with love and hope. They had faced the darkness together and emerged stronger. And as they stood in the grand hall, the echoes of the past fading away, Xena knew that their future was bright. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. The sun rose over the sprawling estate, casting a warm, golden glow across the lush gardens. The mansion, once a place of shadows and secrets, now stood as a symbol of new beginnings. Inside, Xena and Roger William woke to a world forever changed by their love. The air was filled with the soft hum of nature, the scent of blooming flowers wafting through the open windows, and the gentle rustling of leaves as the morning breeze danced through the trees. Xena lay beside Roger, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was a sound that had become her sanctuary, a reminder of the life they had fought so hard to protect. As the sunlight filtered through the curtains, she opened her eyes, catching a glimpse of the engagement ring on her finger. It sparkled with the promise of a future filled with joy, love, and endless possibilities. Roger stirred beside her, his arm tightening around her waist. He gazed down at Xena, his eyes filled with a tender affection that warmed her soul. "Good morning, my love," he whispered, his voice a gentle caress. Xena smiled, a soft blush creeping up her cheeks. "Good morning," she replied, her voice tinged with the remnants of sleep. She traced a finger along his jawline, marveling at the man who had not only saved her but had also shown her the true meaning of love. "It's still hard to believe we're here, together and safe." Roger brushed a strand of hair from her face, his expression serious yet filled with love. "We've come a long way, Xena. We've faced so much, and yet here we are, stronger than ever." He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I love you, and I will always be here to protect you." Xena's eyes welled up with tears, not of sadness but of overwhelming happiness. She had never imagined finding such peace and security after the tumultuous life she had led. She had been a lost child, an orphan thrust into a world of crime and deception. But now she was free, a woman who had found her place in the world beside the man she loved. The couple spent the morning in quiet companionship, savoring the tranquility of their home. They wandered through the gardens, hand in hand, pausing to admire the vibrant flowers that adorned the landscape. The estate, once a fortress against danger, now felt like a paradise, a haven where they could build their life together.